Okay, we're going to talk about how to get the contrapositive statement. Now, before we get a contrapositive, you got to know how to get the inverse and the converse, because contrapositives are made out of the inverse and converse function. So let's talk about inverse functions. If your original statement is if P then Q, inverse simply turns both these statements is P and Q, into knots. So for the inverse, instead of saying if P, you say if not P. Okay? And then instead of saying just Q, then Q, we'll say not Q. And that's the inverse. So the original would say if P then Q, then the inverse would say if not P, then not Q. Alright, let's say your original statement said, hey, if not P, then Q. Well, then the inverse would take the opposite of both. You would say, instead of saying if not P, not means just P. So the opposite of not P is P. So that's if P. And right here we say Q. We're going to say not Q. So not Q. So the original is if not P, then Q. Then the inverse is if P, then not Q. Okay? So everything just gets changed to the opposites for inverse. So if the original statement is if P, then not Q, then the opposite of P is not P. And here, the opposite of not Q is Q. And there we go. All right, next statement. If not P, then not Q. If you don't clean up your room, then you won't go out today. Okay, that's an example of a not. So if you change the not to just P, and this not Q to just Q, the statement will read a little differently. If you do clean up your room, then you will go outside. See? All right, now let's work on converse. Converse simply switches it. So if P then Q, it'll not, instead of Q being first and Q being last, Q will be first. If Q, then P. Okay, it just switches it. So the next statement says if not P, then Q. To switch that, we will say if Q, we'll put that first, and then we'll put not P second. Oops. Okay, then not P. See, they just switch. Not P now is here, and Q is now there. All right, the next one, the first one says if P, then not Q. Well, to switch that, we'll say if not Q, then P. We just switched them around. And the last converse that we're going to make starts from the statement if not P, then not Q. To switch those around, we will say if not Q, then not P. Okay, just turns around. All right, now contrapositives are made from both. So you start off with your statement, if P then Q, then you make an inverse of it. The inverse will be not P, not P, and not Q. So I just made the inverse. Okay. Now the contrapositive will take that answer and switch it around. It'll take the not Q over here and put it over here. Not Q, and it'll put the not P from right here second. Not P. And that is your contrapositive. Your contrapositive is when you combine those two. So I can just take this right here and say, oops, that's not wrong, that's not what I wanted. I can take this and just put it as the answer here. Take this. So that's the contrapositive. Yay, contrapositive. All right. Let's put that in color so you guys can see the contrapositive. All right. So next, if the statement is not P then Q, first you start by getting the inverse. The inverse just changes around. So instead of not P, it's just P. And instead of Q, it's not Q. and that's the inverse. Now next, we're going to take that inverse and do a converse on it. So inverse plus converse. So I'm going to put the not Q over here, and then I'm going to put the P on the other side. And that right there creates the contrapositive, since I've done both. This is the combination of both. So let's just copy this and call that the contrapositive. Yay. So we'll put that in green. Contrapositive will be in green. Okay, let's go here. If P, then not Q. So let's make an inverse. So what do you think the inverse would be? The inverse, if you're right, would be not P, then Q. All right. So what do you think the converse of this would be? Give you a second to think about it. The converse would be, if you said Q, then you're right. And if you said not P here, then you're right. That is making a converse out of the inverse. And that's what a contrapositive is. It's making the inverse converse out of the inverse. So we'll put this as the answer. Okay, and let me make this blocked. And we'll make the answer green. There we go. All right, last one. All right, the statement says, if not P, then not Q. We want the inverse. The inverse, what do you think it'll change this to? It'll change it to P. And what do you think it'll change this to? If you say Q, you are right. All right, now we're going to do a converse. What do you think the converse would do next? If you said Q first, then you're right. And if you said P over here, then you're right. Then this is our answer right here. If Q, then P. So we'll put that as the converse. And we'll make it green. And then we'll put the little line back. And we are done with the contrapositive. Oh, my contrapositive will be green. Nice and green. All right, that is it.